Hi class, welcome to Modern Philosophy and its origin in René Descartes. Pat yourself on the back. You are halfway through your survey course in the history of philosophy. You'll notice first off in reading Descartes that although he is still a deeply religious thinker, his overall perspective on the world is mathematical and scientific. This is much in contrast to Pico just a century earlier, for whom philosophy is still clearly rooted in theology. The 16th century is the time of the new science and the development of scientific method. A whole new picture of the world in contrast to the medieval view is established. Whereas physical matter or nature or the universe tends to be understood as finite in the medieval picture, and in accordance with Aristotle's cosmology, in the new scientific picture and after Giordano Bruno, the physical universe comes to be considered as potentially, if not actually, infinite. This is an enormous upheaval and decentering. For most of the ancient world, and almost all of the medieval world, the earth is the center, whereas now there is no center. Celestial and terrestrial realms are different in the medieval picture. Matter and motion are everywhere uniform in the scientific one. Everything has its place and purpose in the great chain of being for the medievals. In the mathematization of nature promoted by the new scientists, neutral space problematizes the idea of final causes. All of life and the cosmos is a theater, a cosmic drama. But now, perhaps life is meaningless and the universe a merely fortuitous collocations of chance occurrences. In the medieval picture, the evidence of the senses is to be given credence. Things are what they appear to be. The modern picture of the world differentiates strictly between those aspects of sense data which correspond to the object themselves and those which are merely invented by the mind, or primary versus secondary qualities. The speculations of the new science in its infancy had an enormous impact on philosophy. Francis Bacon, in his New Atlantis and other essays, promoting the inductive method, empiricism, and the rejection of Aristotle. Previous philosophy, especially scholasticism, had operated on the basis of axioms, or first principles, and had used deductive reasoning or demonstration, the pure power of reason or the mind to comprehend the things of nature and the spirit world, without too much assistance from external evidence or experimental method. Bacon promotes a method of inference, from empirical observation to theory. René Descartes salvages the deductive method over the inductive. For Bacon, praise of the inductive method was still the dream of empiricism rather than its enactment. Descartes, however, fully realizes a scientific rationalism. To give you a sense of the timeline here for major discoveries in scientific and political thought during this period, you can see how the cosmological insights of Copernicus, Brahe, Kepler, and Galileo all precede the inception and defense of a rationalist first philosophy in Descartes' Discourse on Method. From this point, the debates between the rationalists, predominantly in continental Europe, and the empiricists, predominantly on the British Isles, begins in earnest. During Descartes' lifetime and immediately afterwards was a period for the rich development of scientific societies. Fontenelle's Conversations on the Plurality of Worlds picks up Giordano Bruno's On the Infinite, the Universe, and the Worlds, and creates one of the first truly widely read works of popular science. This is also the period of Bayle's Historical and Critical Dictionary, which is the origin of popular encyclopedism. So let's focus now on Descartes and his meditation on first philosophy. Not dissimilarly to the situation of Pico's oration, Descartes begins his famous meditations with a letter of dedication in which he tries to assure his very learned colleagues, deans, and doctors of the sacred faculty of theology in Paris that his revolutionary work is not intended to undermine, but to strengthen belief in the existence of the Christian God. Paradoxically, Descartes insists that only by using his method of skeptical doubt can such foundational truths, the grounds of human knowing, be discovered with certainty. As Descartes writes, if you would be a real seeker after truth, it is necessary that at least once in your life you doubt as far as possible all things. For Descartes, true knowledge, emerging at the other end of perfect skepticism, must be absolutely certain, i.e. indubitable, and so there must be very clear criteria for knowledge. Previous philosophies had tended to ground themselves in either a metaphysics or a theology. Descartes' renovation is to set these and all other disciplines of philosophy on the firm foundation of a clarified epistemology. Descartes was not only the founder of modern philosophy, but the inventor of analytic geometry, and promoted a foundational conception of knowledge that might be as sturdy as the findings of theoretical mathematics. Although the geometrical form of philosophical method is not explicitly on display in the Meditations, the Meditations were designed by Descartes to be a more accessible work, their purpose to establish once and for all a foundation for our knowledge of the external world, to prove the existence and nature of God and of the human soul. In the first meditation, Descartes goes through 3 stages of skepticism, given that the evidence coming in from the senses can be illusory, that dreams and reality are difficult if not impossible to distinguish in many instances, and that an evil genius or demon deceiver might be fabricating all of our experiences of reality, as if we were brains in a vat or inhabitants of the Matrix. How on earth, given all this, could we discover any certain knowledge of what the senses or our own mind reveals? Recall that skepticism was an ancient school of philosophy, including figures like Pyrrhus, Sextus Empiricus, and even cynics like Diogenes. The skeptics raised doubts about academic knowledge and held the position that little or nothing can be known for certain. The world is too mysterious for that. It is crucial to underline that Descartes' skepticism, or Cartesian skepticism as it came to be known, is the furthest thing imaginable from a positive skeptical position. Descartes utilizes skepticism strictly as a method, which states, doubt everything so as to discover what cannot be doubted. What sorts of things did Descartes doubt on his path towards certain knowledge? Well, everything, or almost. According to him, he doubted the reality of what the senses show us, the truths of mathematics, and whether all appearances are an illusion produced by an evil genius. Nevertheless, one thing for Descartes remained absolutely impossible to doubt. You called it, I think, therefore I am. Or I am a thinking thing. Descartes' famous cogito ergo sum, or cogito for short. From this single, absolutely indubitable truth, Descartes' system proceeds a little bit like the little Descartes that could. I think, therefore I can, solve all the problems of philosophy. Given this one epistemic certainty, Descartes went on to argue that we can in fact know other truths, such as the existence of God, the reality of the material world, the veridicality or truthfulness of the evidence from the senses, the demonstrations of mathematics, even the existence and the nature of the soul, almost all the things his skeptical method had initially bracketed out. Reinventing Anselm's ontological argument, Descartes argued that since I am an imperfect thinking existence, there must be a perfect existence, or God, responsible for my existence, and that such a perfect being is necessarily good and not an evil deceiver. 3 key philosophical or epistemic problems that modern philosophy inherits, from Descartes in particular, include solipsism, innate ideas, and the notion of formal reality. Solipsism is the idea that I am the only person who exists. Descartes certainly does not believe that, but it could be construed as a stage along the path of his method of skeptical doubt. The I think, therefore I am, or cogito, minimally proves that only its bearer exists. So how to move from the I think, of the self-positing or auto-foundational self, to both the external world and the community of thinking minds, remains after Descartes an epistemic problem, even if a sophistic or a trivial one. The notion of innate ideas receives important development in Descartes. Recall that for Plato, innate ideas are those attainable by the soul through recollection. All ideas and the structure of physical reality as a whole for Plato were innate. Descartes' conception of innate ideas is more modest, including the truths of mathematics and the basic concepts that any mind can be imagined as equipped with by virtue of being a mind, regardless of whether anything else exists. Formal or absolute reality is more simply just what exists, independently of anyone knowing it to exist. These concepts are developed in the third meditation, where Descartes takes an inventory of the contents of our minds, what innate ideas are, and how they are distinctive, and where he also presents his arguments for the 2 degrees of reality, or mental substance and physical substance being extended in space, and mental substance lacking extension, as well as his 2 arguments for the existence of God. Our textbook is clear and straightforward on the structure of Descartes' meditations, and the selections from Descartes we have are very readable and enjoyable as well, so I won't belabor Descartes' points here. Something to underline in understanding Descartes' criteria for defining formal reality, however, is his principle of clear and distinct ideas, which reads, "Whatever is clearly and distinctly perceived to be true must be so." This epistemic defines the criteria for certainty and can be considered the most influential epistemological idea in Descartes. The most influential overall idea in Cartesian metaphysics is dualism, involving in Descartes a strict separation of thinking substance and physical or extended substance, the res cogitans and the res extensa, which Descartes argues for extensively in his sixth meditation. The upshot here is that the world for Descartes is basically a vast machine. Descartes famously speculates that the pineal gland in the human brain is the site where the human soul or its thinking substance interacts with its physical machine. Descartes' mathematization of all physical nature will become foundational for modern science. In Meditations 4 and 5, Descartes explores how error is a result of will overreaching intellect, and how error can be avoided. This is also the meditation where he argues most clearly that material things are essentially extended volumes, and gives a third proof for God's existence. Galileo had already mathematized nature in his dialogue concerning the two chief world systems. Descartes extends this principle to include the human and biological sciences. Two of the most important concepts for understanding the later history of rationalism and empiricism after Descartes is the a priori, a posteriori distinction. These are fancy Latin words, and you just sort of have to commit them to memory. A posteriori, or after experience knowledge, is based on experience. A priori knowledge exists independently and prior to experience in the human mind. Two famous examples of a priori knowledge are propositions such as all bachelors are unmarried, or 2 + 2 is 4. Bachelors are unmarried is a priori because if you know the concept of the bachelor, then you know that by definition of the concept, bachelors are unmarried. However, it could well be that the concept of the bachelor is based on empirical experience alone, as is the concept of marriage, so this example of a priori knowledge could be debated. But if you were to imagine a pure mind without any experience that indeed did know the concept of a bachelor, you could argue in principle that they know a priori that they are unmarried. The example of 2 + 2 = 4 simple truths of mathematics is more straightforward. If you know the concept of 2, the concept of plus, the concept of equals to, and are capable of performing a synthetic operation within your mind, then you know that 2 + 2 = 4 independently of experience of any one or two things in the world. Kant will distinguish between these two examples, arguing that in the second case, because it involves a synthetic mental operation, whereas knowing that the concept unmarried is included in the concept bachelor is a priori analytic knowledge. More on a priori and a posteriori knowledge when we get to the other rationalists and empiricists, as well as Kant, in the next 2 weeks. Even though Descartes uses the method of skeptical doubt, he is definitely not a skeptic, but a rationalist foundationalist. Descartes is a rationalist because he bases his knowledge in the first instance on pure reason, not sense experience, and he is a foundationalist because knowledge must rest on the foundation of rational belief supported by clear and distinct ideas. Descartes must really be approached with a lot of deference and respect, for what he has accomplished is genuinely awe-inspiring. In Descartes, science is given a new legitimacy, knowledge is given a new independence. He can be considered the prince of the rationalists in whom epistemology is triumphant, and physical nature has become, for the first time, fully explicable. But there are also a great deal of problems that the Cartesian system bequeaths to the rest of modern philosophy. How to understand the place of humans in nature if nature is just a grand physical machine? How to understand the distinct ontological categories of the mind and the body and how they interact? And how to prevent a revenant or return of skepticism that would seek to scientifically and rationally undermine the claims of religion and theology. These problems are far from solved in our contemporary era, and in a way Descartes' skeptical method, meant only as a stepping stone to clarity and truth, backfired, insofar as the Cartesian mathematization of nature may, in the end, have no need of God after all. I would like to now pivot to a more humanistic critique of Descartes' fundamental position in philosophy by way of some remarks on Descartes in Jean-Joseph Gou's book Oedipus Philosopher. It is a true myth that Descartes, along with Malebranche who came before him, and other rationalists after him are the heroes of modern thought and the originators of modern philosophy. The exalted status of Descartes as the father of modern philosophy has certainly become a mythical presupposition of modern thinking, but that doesn't make it untrue. Descartes' two heroic gestures are to claim that thought cannot be one, obscure and indistinct, and two, that matter is fully mathematizable by thought. Descartes therefore imbues the philosopher no less than the natural scientist with a limitless hope that we might be able to pierce the secret of nature's intimate laws, penetrate all her mysteries, and in short, make ourselves masters and possessors of nature. The cogito ergo sum can be understood as a victory cry, the shout of a successful patricide, throwing off the shackles of traditional scholastic theology and the exultation of a son who now knows that he no longer depends upon his ancestors or anyone else in order to stand on his own 2 feet and to walk without assurance, without, like Oedipus, limping. In setting knowledge on new foundations outside of the history of philosophy we've studied so far, grounding it in a new epistemology and a new analytic geometry of nature, the Cartesian project sets out on a new type of walkabout into an open human cognitive future, Columbus's new seas, and is no longer beholden to the consensus of scholarly experts in the history of theology and philosophy. Jean-Joseph Gou thus compares Descartes to Oedipus in the play by Sophocles. Oedipus had denounced initiation or instruction by the priests. He solved the riddle of the Sphinx all by himself, taking up the kingship of Thebes and marrying its queen, Jocasta, unbeknownst to him, his own mother. Oedipus purported to set himself up as a thinker with no master but himself. His accidental murder of the father on his way to Thebes, response to the Sphinx, and possession of the mother, being the 3 great moments of his drama that we can recognize in the 3 great moments of Descartes' own undertaking. Despite his obsequious preface to the Doctors of Theology in Paris, the implication of the Cartesian system is more or less a new beginning beyond the consensus of the Church Fathers. His response to the riddle of the Sphinx or nature is to mathematize her, bringing her fully under the dominion of human thought. And as a result, Descartes has tamed and possessed Mother Nature and inaugurated a new form of Western cultural consciousness that in the long run despiritualizes, disrespects, and exploits our common home. Descartes is the heroic founder of modern philosophy, a new father, because he has vanquished the monstrosity of obscure and indistinct ideas by using the weapon of reason and self-consciousness. Much like Oedipus in his solving of the riddle of the Sphinx, Descartes eliminates the profuse swarm of obscure and indistinct ideas. The cogito is his response to that Sphinx. Note the enormous difference here with Pico, who affirms the human being and its rationality as itself chameleon or sphinx-like. In Pico, the Sphinx was Pico himself, in his capacity to achieve the intelligence of the cherubim. In Descartes, however, the Sphinx is wholly dominated by man, undone by reflective self-evidence, and struck down by the cogito, wholly banished from the realm of thought. To go along with this fable, I would like to read you in conclusion from Michel Serres' essay on La Fontaine and Descartes in his first translated into English book, Hermes, Literature, Science, and Philosophy. It is interesting that for Serres, the first meditation closes with the representation of a slave who, while sleeping, dreams that he is free. The demonstrative order, taken by Descartes from the Greek geometricians, links together relationships or proportions, as is noted throughout Descartes' regulations for the operation of the human mind. The relationships that Descartes quantifies apply to very different things, relations of size, height, ruse, and power, and even occasionally relations of sovereignty and slavery. Throughout, Descartes' foundational project is concerned with more powerful, less powerful, better, worse, before, after, more or less true, more or less false, and so on. Serres brilliantly underlines that in the Cartesian meditations, all the rhetoric and all the moves that Descartes makes are designed to maximize. The syntax confirms this without exception. Comparatives of order, superlatives of maxima. Descartes speaks of his age, quote, so ripe that I could not hope for another after it, and in which I could be adequate to execute this enterprise. Of his project, he writes, "It made me defer so long that I would henceforth believe myself at fault if I spent in deliberation the time that remains to me. Optimal age, optimal time, such that there no longer remains any better." Descartes again speaking of doubt, and the result is the universal quantification. A constant repetition in Descartes' text of all, always, never, absolutely, and so on. And many appearances of the word always, the key word, "I shall always follow this path." Descartes' optimization of a fixed Archimedean point for knowledge is in the end continuously a hyperbolic gesture, as is his mock performance of skeptical doubt. Hypocritical ruse and hyperbolic doubt continually fill Descartes' minds with so many doubts that he overcomes by way of hypocritical once and for all gestural foundations for knowledge. Descartes is playing an intellectual game with God and nature, and one in which the malleable wax and himself becomes one so that he can always win. And insofar as Descartes does win, everything becomes possible for him. Optics, dioptics, the world and its system, medicine and everything that follows from it. Error has been checkmated in a game of domination, and all of nature is reduced to slavery, even the human body. Metaphysics operates strategically on the world, such that physics and the exact science model themselves on Cartesian certainty, overcoming their status as partial and dispersed tactics in the art of life. Like many other philosophers, Descartes pursued his military calling in metaphysics. As Jean-Joseph Gou had situated the Cartesian project within the myth of Oedipus, Serres concludes by situating Descartes within the fable of the wolf and the lamb in La Fontaine. To know is to put to death, to kill the lamb deep in the woods in order to eat it. Descartes' epistemology is far from innocent, though he claims to have been visited by an angel before writing his meditations. Descartes promotes the philosophical policies of a military strategist. The reason of the strongest thinker is reason itself, and the Cartesian man becomes the wolf of science. After Descartes, modern philosophy increasingly distinguishes epistemology, theory of knowledge, from metaphysics, theory of reality, as well as logic, aesthetics, and ethics. Next week, we'll examine the development of modern philosophy in the materialist ontology of Hobbes, the empirical epistemology of Locke, the idealist ontology of Berkeley, and also the rationalist ontologies of Leibniz and Spinoza, and the skeptical epistemology of Hume. What remains presupposed throughout all these divergent philosophies is Descartes' idea that knowledge must be grounded in certainty, although the empiricist tradition will retain more room for probability in their thought as well. Okay, thanks for listening, and I'll see you all next week.